Okay, we're live on YouTube now. Just give people, I guess, a couple minutes Okay, yeah, it should be easy to allow people to ask their questions directly.
Good.
Okay, I think it's all set now.
Cool, Alex, should we start introducing it?
Yeah,
now?
Let's do that.
Make people can filter in as we're talking.
All right. So hello and welcome to Lockdown Film School, our weekly series of discussions with filmmakers in various fields. I'm Alex Heaney, editor-in-chief of Seventh Row, and my co-host today is executive editor Orla Smith. So this week, we're really delighted to be joined by acclaimed British filmmaker Mike Leigh. Last year, we had the pleasure of writing an ebook about Mike's work and his filmmaking process, and that was called Peterloo in Process, a Mike Leigh Collaboration, which you can find at mikeleigbook.com. So when we wrote the book, we actually spoke to Mike himself and many of his frequent collaborators, which included cinematographer Dick Pope, costume designer Jacqueline Duran, and many more. So we're really excited today to use what we learned from writing that book as a jumping off point to discuss Mike's work and process with him in even more detail. So the way that we're going to work the session today is Orla is going to facilitate a discussion with Mike for about 40 minutes, at which point we will turn the tables over to you, our viewing audience on both Zoom and YouTube, for an audience question and answer session. So if you are on YouTube, you can write in your questions in the comments, and if you're here on Zoom, if you put in a request in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to tell us that you want to ask a question, then we will have you actually speak your question to Mike so that he can ask for clarifications and you guys can interact directly. Before we start our discussion, let me just sort of give you a brief overview of Mike's process as we understand it, so that we're all on the same page and can go a bit deeper in this discussion. So while all filmmaking is collaborative, Mike really takes collaboration to another level by developing the characters and script with his actors for months before shooting begins. He also encourages the actors to work with department heads to decide where the characters live, what they wear, and how their hair and makeup should be done. And then he also encourages collaboration and cooperation across all the technical departments to ensure a unified look. His directorial approach is quietly radical, starting with little more than a basic premise for a film and developing this idea into a full-fledged story in collaboration with his actors. He starts rehearsals by working with each actor individually to develop his or her character, always based on real people the actor knows personally. And then Leigh will join up actors who will be performing together. And through that improvisation, actors develop a shared history with each other up until the moment when the film begins. And from there, the script slowly takes shape until it becomes what we see on screen. So I'm going to turn it over to Orla now to begin our discussion.
Cool. So first of all, I wanted to start by asking about your casting process, because obviously you have a rotating cast of brilliant character actors who you work with regularly. But what's the process for casting an actor who you've never worked with before or who's an unknown?
Just about the thing of working with actors that I've worked with before. I mean, that sometimes happens, but I always work with new actors, and there's no routine to working with actors that I've worked with previously. But obviously, if you work with somebody and it's successful, you come back for more. But I always look for and work with new actors. And they are, as I think you just said, Orla, they are I work with character actors, which is to say people that don't just play themselves, but are able to be versatile and play real people out there in the street and enjoy doing that and are committed to doing that. The casting process, apart from the usual things like seeing people in films, seeing people in plays and all the rest of it, the actual important thing when I'm auditioning is that I, first of all, it's important that I say there must be character actors and they also must be intelligent actors, and not all actors are intelligent, in fact. So that's one important criteria. And I've got to feel that an actor is somebody who's going to work with other people and be creative and is interested in the world and isn't just motivated by a kind of narrow ego. So I never audition with anybody else there. I don't have gangs of casting directors and producers and everybody else sitting in the room. It's always just one-on-one. If you come and see me, the first thing that'll happen is we'll spend 20 minutes, usually half an hour, just chatting about this, that, and the other. And if it seems to make sense, I'll invite you back later on, and we'll spend an hour, again, just with me, and I'll ask you to do some work based on a real person and do a bit of acting in a natural, real way. And by that means, I sort of find the people I'm looking for. But the important thing is to, of course, it's all about building an ensemble, building a group, building a cast that can work together. And that evolves gradually in the way that Alex has already outlined, by gradually putting people together. And we'll talk about that probably in more detail. But the important thing is that each actor has to have the ability to not only do the acting, but to do things like go and research things, do background, and also to be patient, because it's in the nature of this kind of work that not everybody can be doing something all at the same time. So, you know, we fix that, and then somebody has to wait for a while while we fix that, and we come back. So people have to have the ability to be patient and not get frustrated if they are not actually doing something right. But I always try and make sure that people have got things to do when they're not actually in the rehearsal room, like going off and researching and working out backstories and so on.
So are you often sort of going to the theatre or the cinema actively looking for actors who you find interesting to work with?
Absolutely. It's part of the director's job.
Yeah. Well, I was curious because your ideas for a film initially are quite sort of broad or vague. And you do have that, as I said, rotating cast of character actors who you tend to work with. But when you start a film not knowing...
Again, I must just repeat what I said about that. Sometimes I work with the same people, but not always.
Yes, of course. But when you are sort of choosing to work with people who you've worked with before, or even just casting people you haven't worked with, what does that casting process or thinking about who you're going to cast look like when you don't actually know who the characters are before you start working? You only have the idea of the premise, as I understand.
Well, look, here's the thing. My films fall into various categories. At one end of the spectrum, there are films where I really have got the vaguest of ideas, or the loosest, or various different possibilities, and I don't really know what the film is going to be. And I mean, in a way, all of my films, to a greater or lesser extent, even the historical ones, and I'll talk about that in a minute, all of them are, and this is a key to understanding what I do and why I do it, the journey of making the film is the journey of discovering what the film is. Now, just to digress for a moment, this is not uncommon at all for novelists, painters, composers, poets, sculptors, and all sorts of other artists. You know, that people don't necessarily, that the sculptor doesn't know what that sculpture is that's inside that lump of stone before he or she starts to chisel away. You discover it, you interact with the material. So I may have some notion as to what the film's going to be. And sometimes that's more than vague. And sometimes it's just a feeling. And then gradually, as I start to work on the thing and interact with the canvas, so to speak, I start to get the idea of where it might go. And of course, what I get back from improvisations and all that very much informs where we go and so on. So to go back to your question, having said that, in the case of my 3 historical films, Topsy Turvy, Mr. Turner and Peterloo, obviously we knew what the historical events were that we're going to dramatize. That isn't to say that there was a script, and it isn't to say that we knew in detail all the characters and details, but we knew there was a premise. So some of the characters in those films are characters that we've made up, and a lot of them are actually portraits or interpretations of people that actually existed. So those are at one end of the spectrum, and in a way those are separate from the rest of my films. Because the rest of my films, apart from anything else, have been made on the premise that we've said to the backers, can't tell you anything about it, don't know what the film's going to be, either give us the money or don't, as you wish, but we can't tell you what it is, we can't tell you who's in it, we'll deliver a film. And the majority of films I've made, and indeed, while there's quite a lot of stage plays that I've created, have been made on that premise. Now, to go back to your question about casting, sometimes I'll have a notion for a character or a possible kind of character, and I think, well, this actor will be right for that. Sometimes, often, I start from the premise of this is a very versatile and interesting actor, and there are all kinds of possibilities of what I might collaborate with this actor, what we might come up with. There are certain films that I've made where there was a very definite agenda. Two of them, one was Secrets and Lies, which arose from the fact that there were people very close to me with adoption-related experiences, and because they've adopted children. I, on looking into that, discovered that actually what was more interesting and important to explore wasn't so much people who adopt children, but the babies who are given away and the mothers that give those babies away and what that's all about. And that was the basis of the film. So I knew, broadly speaking, what I was going to investigate. Similarly, we have Vera Drake, which, as you know, is set in 1950, about a backstreet abortionist. The important thing about that film is it's set at a time before the British 1967 Abortion Act, which obviated the necessity for these illegal backstreet abortionists. And I'm old enough to remember what it was like before that act, when people had unwanted pregnancies and these people were around dealing with it. And for a very long time, I had a notion to make a film about that. So when we embarked on that film, we actually, I knew what it was I was going to investigate, although the details within it were very much had to be explored and discovered through the process of creating characters. But when you take a film like Naked or Happy Go Lucky, I mean, Naked began with the vaguest of notions about feeling about things, something to do with male behavior, something maybe to do with the fact that we were going to reach the year 2000 in 8 years' time, the end of the apocalyptic millennium. But really, I didn't, it could go anywhere. And so I started again with the character that David Thewlis plays, and we started to explore, and the other things sort of grew from that in a way that's quite hard to chart. Happy Go Lucky, I had nothing more than the notion that, having worked with Sally Hawkins a number of times, who's a very versatile character actress, I thought, well, let's put her at the center. Whatever we do, let's put Sally at the center of the film, and in some way, all I knew what to do was tap into a kind of energy that she has. That isn't to say that the character Poppy in the film is Sally Hawkins, because she absolutely isn't. But that was a starting point, but that's only a starting point, like the paint on the one mark on the canvas that the artist does, you know. So it's about, so some actors I cast with the character in mind, some actors I cast because they know they're good actors and you never know where you're going to go. I mean, there are some actors, to go back to what you've been talking about, who I have worked with a lot. I mean, the record holder is Leslie Manville, who's been in my films 10 times. And one of the deals that I always make with every actor the second time is, whatever we do, we're not going to repeat ourselves. And if you look at Leslie Manville's performance on all 10 occasions, they're completely different characters, because she's very versatile. So you know that with an actor like that, you know, the sky's the limit, basically. But then again, you know, in casting All or Nothing, for example, 2 actors came, one of whom was James Corden, by the way, came in, who were very tubby. And, I thought that both of them, he and she, were tubby actors, and I thought they could play brother and sister. They look like each other. Similarly, in Life is Sweet, it occurred to me that Jane Horrocks and Claire could play sisters. Only when we started to investigate it did it occur to me that they could actually be twins, and so on and so forth. So I think that answers your question to some extent.
Yeah. And I guess
just another couple of things. For example, when we were going to make Mr. Turner, we auditioned. We found all sorts of actors who of an age who could play the painters in the Royal Academy, and all those actors can paint. They can all paint and draw. When we did Topsy Turvy, everybody who we auditioned, they did the acting audition, but then they had to pass a singing audition as well. They had to be able to sing, and not only that, they had to be able to sing that kind of stuff, basically. So those are also important, the skills that people have.
So leading on from that, I was going to ask, how does the rehearsal process differ, if it does, when a film is sort of more ensemble based, but versus sort of like Naked or Happy Go Lucky, where it's very much sort of centered around this character who's the propulsive force of the film?
Well, I mean, I don't think you should be distracted by my talking about the central characters in Naked or Happy Go Lucky as being just, it's not just about them. Really, to answer your question in the terms that you put it, there is no difference at all, because they're all ensemble. It doesn't matter whether there's 2 characters out of a total of 7 or 8 characters, or 2 characters out of a total of 160 characters like there are in Peterloo. You know, I still start one-on-one with people, whoever they are, and it builds up. And if it so happens that these events involving a lot of people, then that's what it involves. If it's only a few people, that's what it's involved. But there is no difference. It's the same thing. Just a question of the subject and the scale.
Right, yeah. Watching your films, it struck me how I feel like a lot of your films really capture their specific locations so well. Not just like London overall, but like the particular parts of London they're set in, like Dalston and Naked, or Camden in Happy Go Lucky. And I was wondering, at what point in the process and how do you decide on the particulars of where a film is going to be set?
Well, that's an interesting question. Sometimes it doesn't really, at a certain level, it sort of doesn't matter. You know, like a suburb is a suburb. And so sometimes it's just to do with where we happen to be, where's useful for in relation to where we happen to be rehearsing. And by the way, we always take an empty building of some kind and develop it all in that as kind of rehearsal base. Sometimes it's specific. It's a question of simply getting it right, really, wherever it is. In the case of Naked, for example, it wasn't so much a question of choosing Dalston. It was a question of finding the building in which the house, in which that flat was going to be. And the production designer, Alison Chitty, kept coming back with pictures of different houses with flats in them all over London. And I had a sense that it shouldn't just be any bland, ordinary house, like maybe the one you're in, which has got a flat in it. I wanted it to have, I kept saying it has to have a kind of edge to it, kind of an atmosphere, a mood. And finally, they found this Gothic, neo-Gothic Victorian house on a corner surrounded by roads on both sides, what you see in the film. And it sort of, I think that, right, that's it. And that therefore took us to Dalston. It could have been anywhere in London, basically. It just a question of finding the right location. In my film All or Nothing, it needed to be in a council flats. Now, the problem with council flats is they're very, very difficult to film in because, people live there and it's a complicated thing. We happened to rehearse the film in Greenwich, in an old disused primary school in Greenwich. And at the appropriate time, I said to the production designer, okay, we have to be in, to everybody, we have to be in flats. And actually there's more than one flat. There's characters live in different flats in this. And they said, this is really going to be difficult. And the hunt went on. And one day the production designer with the location manager came and said, you'll never guess what, just down the road in Greenwich, because they'd said, you don't have to go anywhere in Greater London to find. In Greenwich, there's a housing estate that's going to be pulled down and it's completely empty and it's got 300 flats in it. And we can get in there and have complete control of it. And, so that's what, and so of course, it meant that we could create, not only did we have control over it technically, but we could create this rather empty, gloomy, bleak atmosphere of this place. Now that's, so in other words, it's a combination of imagination, specificity, practicality, but in the end, it has to be, it's all about the imagery of the film, obviously, that's the most important thing. So sometimes it's arbitrary or in random, and sometimes it isn't. People have said, talked about my films, about the London films. I mean, most of my London films, you don't actually see very much that identifies it as London, unless you happen to know the district that it's in. Whereas in Happy Go Lucky, you actually see her cycling around recognizable sites at the beginning and things. But even then, some of my films could happen in Manchester, they could happen in Birmingham or Bristol or wherever,
So you have sort of a decades-long relationship with many of your heads of department. So I imagine identifying the right person to choose a new collaborator is important because you might want to work with them repeatedly. So how do you choose your heads of department where there's someone you haven't worked before, like say Susie Davies, who you only started working with in the past decade? And what are you looking for in a person when you start collaborating with them?
Look, my answer to that is unremarkable. You sense someone you can get on with and you're going to click with, and share tastes and has a sense of humor and, coming from the same place. And sometimes you meet someone and you think, yeah, you know what, they've got a great track record, but, this might be a production designer that's maybe too arty, or it's going to find it very difficult to work with lower budgets or whatever it is. But you sense it, and and you take risks, and they take risks too. I mean, it's a two-way thing. They've got to be comfortable. So that's all I can say about it. Really, it's kind of when you click with somebody, it's great.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to an interview with one of your collaborators, Dick Pope, recently, and he said that you love sort of cramped spaces and narrow hallways or stairwells in your sets because they sort of force actors to squeeze past each other, and that can create conflict or interesting scenarios, which made me think about how you sort of set up your rehearsal spaces or sets in a way that might breed sort of interesting improvisations.
The truth of it is, he said that, I didn't. Because the thing about that is it may have some truth in it, but if you take it literally, take what he's saying literally, it sounds as though that's a necessary ingredient for making it all happen, but it isn't. If you think about any film, we've talked about Naked a few times. I mean, there's quite a lot of big spaces in Naked, and those spaces are themselves what makes it happen. So for me, it's about people and places, the relationship between, the organic relationship between people and place. And there are different kinds of people, and different kinds of places, different kinds of relationships that people have with those places. If it's true, and of course it is at a certain level, that lots of my films we do look at people in confined domestic spaces. That's not a choice in order to make something artistic happen. It's because those characters live in those kind of spaces. You know, some people live in small houses or in flats and something. You know, he's referred on a number of occasions to the unquestionable fact that I've got lots of scenes that happen on staircases. That's partly because it's just interesting what happens on staircases, but it's not a kind of aesthetic or artistic fetish. It's that those are environments that people are in, basically, you know.
Right, okay. Well, one thing that he did tell me was about sort of the part of your process, maybe partway through rehearsal, he shows you the camera tests he's done for the film. And
well, yes, but that's correct. But what actually happens before that is there has to be obviously one of the great myths about what I do is people say, oh, well, when do you decide when you start shooting? Which is, of course, a ridiculous question, because you can't suddenly say, well, oh, I know, it's Friday, let's start shooting a film on Monday. There's a lot of planning. So when you start, you know, if you start on February the 1st, you know that the shoot is going to start on July the 1st. And that is a fact that's set in stone. And everything you do has got that deadline to work to. Now, I initially go into the work with the actors and nobody knows what's happening, and it's just about the actors, and we're exploring characters and building them up, putting them together and doing improvisations and all the rest of it. But there has to be a point at which I have to start to say to the production designer, to cinematographer and the other people behind the camera, I have to say what I think it's going to be. I have to start talking in concrete terms because they need to plan and so on. So the first thing that will happen is which is what we're now talking about, I will say to Dick Pope and the production designer and the costume designer and the makeup designer, but primarily to the cinematographer, to Dick Pope, I'll say, what I picture is, in the case of Naked, I was able to say, it's a kind of solo journey. It's a sort of, there's something monochromatic about it, something nocturnal, and that's what I said. On that basis, he was able to start to think about it photographically, and indeed shot tests. And that's what you're talking about. But that's already, it's not just him coming with, he has to know what it is he's testing, what the motivation is for what he's actually doing. Conversely, with Happy-Go-Lucky, I'd reached a stage where it was clear the sort of central dynamic of the thing, which we've already alluded to. And I was able to say to him, it's about primary colors. I see it bursting with color. And he actually went off. It so happened by coincidence that weekend, the film trade fair was in London, and he went and Fujifilm, we were still shooting on film at that time, Fujifilm announced a new film stock, which was all primary colors. And he went to them and said, oh, this is fantastic. We're making a film that's exactly what we want. And they said, oh, great. And they gave us the stock for free because so we could experiment with it. Another film, which you've been looking at recently, I think, Another Year, I was rather vague about the look of the thing. And he tried to interpret what I was saying, a little bit woolly, I think. And so he went away and shot tests. And he came back and he said, okay, I've shot the tests. And we arranged to go into a preview theatre in Soho early in the morning. And he said, look, there are I'm going to give you four different looks, four different visual photographic qualities. You have to decide which way to go. And at that point in the story, I was developing it with the actors, and I was looking for some clue about something. And I sat there and I saw these four versions. And we came out and he said, okay, which way do you want to go? And I said, all of them. Because what we're actually going to do, and I've only just thought of this while I was in there for 5 minutes. These short, the clips are very short. We're going to do spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And each one of them, you can have a different photographic color quality, different look. And that's what we did. So it's all about, and then of course that fed back into the work I was then doing with the actors. And of course it feeds into the production design and the costume and makeup design.
Right. So when you have that first kind of visual interaction with the film, conception of the film, that changes what you do in the rehearsal room.
Well, it informs it because, again, as I said earlier on, it's all part of an ongoing process. I mean, we haven't got to the actual making of the film yet. In the conversation.
I mean, to that point, not to continue to let Dick Pope put words in your mouth, but I did also hear him say that you like the experience of shooting over the experience of rehearsal, that you prefer shooting. Is that true?
Absolutely true.
Right.
He's absolutely right. No, look, the so-called rehearsals, which aren't really rehearsing, we're not really rehearsing in the conventional sense of getting something right. We're just preparing the premise of the film, establishing the characters and the whole dynamic and the world of the film. And it's quite a stimulating thing to do, but it's not, it's only digging the soil, it's only preparing something. The actual creative process is making the actual film and having something to show at the end of every day. And so, briefly, when it comes to shooting the film, it's about, first of all, right towards the end of the whole preparatory process, which usually goes on for 4, 5, or 6 months, I will write a very broad structure, which has got no dialogue or anything. It's just the premise of what happens in the narrative, which I will share with the behind the camera people. There's something we didn't say about the acting, and that is important for all except the historical films, that when I ask an actor to take part in a film, I say, please be in this film. I can't tell you anything about it because we're going to find out what it is by doing it. I can't tell you about the character because you and I are going to collaborate to make a character. And this is the other important thing. I say to you, actor, you will never know anything about the whole thing except what your character knows. So that means at any stage of the work, during the improvisations and development, they only see the whole world from the point of view of their character, and they can only experience through the character, and they haven't got an overview of the whole thing. So when it gets to the end of the preparatory period and I prepare a script, they don't see that whole thing. They just know parts of it. And then I then scene by scene, sequence by sequence, during the shoot, we will have rehearsal days and shooting days. I'll go to a location, we'll improvise, and then we'll stop. And through rehearsal, we'll pin it down and write it in a very precise way. So what we shoot is very, very seldom actually improvised on camera. Occasionally there are moments, but really that's very much the exception. What we arrive at is something very precise. Then we share it with the crew and we work out how to shoot it, and we shoot it. And what the actors are certainly known for in these films are being very accurate and very comfortable and precise and secure in what they're doing in front of the camera.
I'm curious about the fact that I've heard it said you've gone into shooting quite a few of your films without knowing the ending. And do you find that daunting? Why is that?
Well, it's I can only repeat what I've already said. It's a journey of discovery. I mean, it's not uncommon for a painter not to know how the painting is going to finally look, or the novelist not, or even the playwright not to know until he or she gets there what the end is. Sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it's a matter of evolving and discovering and exploring and digging and arriving at something that you then know is right. but it's a creative process, you know. And how is it daunting? Yeah, sure, it's daunting, very daunting. But that's in the nature of the creative journey.
Mm. Well, since you sort of understand each character's life back until when they were born, the same with their relationships with the other characters, I'm curious how you decide where to start the film. Like, how do you craft an opening for one of your films?
Well, it's not a question of crafting the opening. It's a question of deciding where to, you know, what perspective on the whole thing to make the premise. And again, it's the same questions you might ask of any artist. I mean, you know, you somehow it presents itself, and you think about it, and you think, well, we could do that. And actually, that fortunately, if that happened, or you think, well, actually, we don't need to go into all that because that will be implicit, and so we could start there. And, you know, those kinds of thoughts. But these are the ordinary processes of storytelling.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing that I haven't heard you talk about much is how you approach sort of sound in your films. Like, what are you looking for sound-wise on set? Are you thinking about the sound design as you shoot? And are there certain films for which you think sound is more important than on others? No,
I don't think sound is any more important in one film than another. Sound is part and parcel of the whole thing. What is wonderful is when you're blessed, as I have been for a long time, with a brilliant sound designer who can record, you know, lots of things and all at the same time with incredible use of ever improving technology. It's wonderful, you know. Don't forget, I've been making films for a very long time, and in the early days, I made films for the BBC, where it was very simple and basic, 16mm film, very simple sound. In the end, it's about recording a world that feels like a real world. And the more that can be done in detail and depth, and the more it can be done so that it doesn't have to be cobbled together in an artificial way afterwards, the better. But on the other hand, when you get to post-production and you get to all the fascinating things you can do with sound in the sound editing, that is exciting as well. But perhaps we'll talk about editing and the post-production in due course. But sound is very important, obviously. But the important thing is, like everything else, although my films are not naturalistic, they're realistic, but not naturalistic. It is about creating a world that's totally believable. That's what the sound must do, and that's what the camera must do, and that's what everything must do. The acting should do.
To just go a bit broader for a moment, I was talking to Alex about your films because we've been rewatching them recently, and she made the point that I feel like a lot of your later films feel like they could be less easily transferable from stage to screen, the stories and the way that they play out. And it made me wonder whether you sort of like your interest in what kind of stories to tell and how to tell them has changed, or how you feel it's changed since your days as a theatre maker working for the BBC to now.
I don't know what you're talking about. My stage plays are stage plays, and my films are films, and they're two separate things. And it's no different now from how it was 50 years ago. They're two different disciplines, and I don't see any of my films as being anything to do with stage plays. I mean, it's true that two of my films, the raw material came from stage play, Bleak Moments and Nuts in May. But apart from that, my films are films conceived as films, and my stage plays are stage plays. So I don't really understand the question, if I'm honest.
That's fair. Could I ask, when was the last time you devised a play from scratch?
Yes, the National Theatre, it was called Grief, and it was 9 years ago.
Right, okay.
And the one before that, on National Theatre in 2005, was called 2000 Years, and that was at the National Theatre. So I haven't stopped doing that. I just happen to, I prefer making films probably, but I do like doing plays, and it's important. And I would at this point be saying, and I would like to do it again, but I'd like, I don't know what anybody's going to be doing ever at the moment. So that's a separate issue.
Right. What do you think it is that you prefer about making films to theatre?
just to reiterate, I mean, plays are a thing in their own right, and they have absolutely their own good experience. I mean, you know, apart from the fact that the great thing about film, and this relates to what we were saying before about people and place and being out there in the real world and breathing the real air and having characters interface with the real world, and the quality of place and time which film captures, and the way you can work and manipulate with time in film is all of that is magical. There are other things. I mean, films travel and they last forever. Plays don't travel so much, or sometimes not at all. And they are I mean, I'm only releasing my plays in their original form, although my play, Abigail's Party, which most people know from the televised version, what was the stage play, that is endlessly being performed by people all around the world. So that lives in a different way, but not in a version that I've directed. It's merely they are doing that script. But that's a sort of byproduct, really. I mean, what I'm really concerned with is the original material itself. And that obviously has a different kind of life span than a film.
Well, to close off our discussion, I'd like to talk about post-production a bit more. Could you kind of describe your kind of collaborative process with your editor? I know often it's John Gregory. How do you approach the editing with him or another editor?
Well, the important thing about much of what we've already talked about is it is collaborative. I mean, I don't shoot my own films with the camera. I don't design them. I don't make the costume, and I don't act them. You know, these are skills that other people bring, and I collaborate with them. And my job, of course, is to push it and pull it around so that it makes some kind of sense. The great thing about a great film editor, I've worked with quite a few, John Gregory most particularly, is, you know, on the one hand, a great film editor is there to interpret the material and to, you know, get to the essence of what it is and do the best with the material. But in other words, he or she is not there to doggedly carry out instructions without any creative input. The more creative input there is from an editor, the better. But again, it works when the editor is on the right wavelength and understands the material and is sympathetic to it. And the editors I work with have had those qualities. So you collaborate with the editor, and sometimes, you know, I sit with an editor for 2-3 days or something, and we work at a section, and then the editor will say, okay, it's Thursday, go away, don't come back till next Tuesday or Wednesday, because I'm going to work on it now. And I'll go back after a few days, and like John Gregory will go in and he'll say, look, I'm going to show you something. If you don't like it, I can put it all back, but let's just see what you think. And sometimes I have to say, yeah, I can see that works, but really that needs to stay as it was. But often I think, wow, that's fantastic. That's really got to the essence of the thing, because it's about the input. I mean, you've done research specifically into Peterloo. I mean, the editing in the massacre sequence of Peterloo is magical. I mean, we created all the material, of which there was a large amount, and he wasn't there when we did that. But when we got in that cutting room, he is dynamite. The way he really, really went through it all and found that, and there's not a frame that he stuck together that I would disagree with in any sense. Of course not, because in the end, it's ultimately my responsibility for it to be what I think it should be. But again, you don't. I mean, there are filmmakers, and I'm not going to name names or anything, who have it all in their heads down to the last detail, and they just want it to be carried out rigorously, so that everything that's on the screen is just what was in their heads to start with. As I keep saying, that's not what it's about for me. It's about a journey of digging and delving and sifting and of discovery to get to the truth of what it is that you're trying to, you were doing, you know, you've been doing all along.
Well, to continue on from this, I'll turn it to the audience now. So Alex will lead that discussion.
So if you are in the Zoom call, if you want to just like tell us that you have a question, and then we'll let you talk. Because so far we've had a bunch of anonymous submissions, and I know Mike had said to us before we started that he'd really love to be able to chat with you directly. So if you can just, as you're submitting questions as we go through this, just let us know if you're okay with asking it yourself, and we'll go from there. I guess I will start with one of the anonymously submitted questions, where it says, Dick Pope recently said on a podcast that you don't use stand-ins. I was wondering why you think it's important to even have the actors be on set for the mundane technical aspects like focus measurements and lighting adjustments.
When he said that, he's mostly right. Of course, what he also said in that podcast, which from the other day with Roger Deakins, he also reported very accurately the fact that when we've decided exactly how we're going to shoot, he then needs time to light the scene. And what I will then do is go away with the actors to somewhere else to refine the dialogue, just to make it, get it really up to shooting conditions. Now, obviously, if I'm doing that, the actors can't be on the set, and therefore technical stand-ins, not actual official stand-ins, but like members of the crew and things, will sit in if it's just a question of measurements and focus and those things. But when it comes to actually rehearsing, the stuff, working with the camera and when normally stand-ins would be used, that's when it's important that the actors themselves do it. And I think it makes a huge difference to the accuracy and the general ensemble as between actors and crew, when the actors don't just walk in at the last moment cold, but they've actually built up they've rehearsed with the crew and everybody's on the same page.
So this is from YouTube, which is, let's see. So Alex C says, have you ever looked back at a film you've made in the past and seen something new in it that you did not at the time?
In a way, yes. I can't say this film and that's what it was. I mean, sometimes you look at a film a long time later that you've made, and you see it, this isn't perhaps what Alex is asking, but you see it in a fresh or new light, in a way. And I can't really say any more than that. I certainly, I can't say that I've had any major revelations in returning to my films. I don't think. I think that's as much as I can say about that.
Then we have Out asks, have you ever disagreed with the direction or take an actor has taken with their character, or have you accepted that lack of control by giving the actor so much of a say?
Well, that's quite a complicated question, because it's not about the premise of the question is a false premise, because it's not about the actor going off in a direction that doesn't make sense to me, or I don't like, or don't want, or giving into the actor doing something that I don't want to happen. It's not about that. It's about growing the thing, about the actor being on the right wavelength and me being on the right wavelength. And if new things happen, and don't forget, it's the character. It's the question of what the character might do. And if the actor it's organic, the actor's in character, and new things happen, it's up to me to say that, yes, let's go with that, or well, maybe it's not that, but let's find the motivation for another version of that, or let's see where that can take us. So it's a question of creative, positive negotiation and arriving at something that is truthful and organic. It's not a question of actors going off in a red herring direction that I really don't like or something. It's just not about that at all. It's about growing and changing and developing and exploring. And as I said earlier, it's all part of the journey of discovery.
So we have a question from Jesse Barr. So I'm going to have Jesse ask the question directly to you. So
will Jesse, I be able to see that?
If Jesse turns on their video, I think so.
Hi.
If you turn on your video, Jesse, you can, oh, did we lose you?
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Oh, hello, hi.
Hi, great. Oh, hi. Thank you all so much for doing this, first of all, and this is such an honor. I'm so appreciate this. Thank you. My question is about the writing process. So once you've worked with your actors and sort of the film is coming alive in a more clear way and you go to write, I just wonder if you could share a little bit about your drafts, about, do you share that with an inner circle of people, implement their notes? Like, when do you know that it feels really ready and full to now begin the shooting process?
Well, have you been listening from the beginning, Jesse?
Yes.
Well, as I said, when to begin the shooting process is set in stone. That's not an artistic affectation. That's a fact of life. And so the job is to arrive at a provisional structure, which isn't the same as a script. It isn't writing a script with dialogue in it. And it's that we set off, and I've already said this, into the process of making the film. And as I say, sequence by sequence, scene by scene, we'll spend time in the location. And that is where what you're talking about, the writing happens. I don't write a script on paper and give it out.
Right.
We improvise, drawing from what we've already experienced, and often new things happen. We're now in the location. And by the way, I can only construct a scene and, if you like, write it by actually being there and seeing it, and being, so the physical relationship, interaction of the actors with the place is part and parcel of what makes it happen. And so through rehearsal and stopping and pinning that down and say, okay, right now, let's repeat that now, let's fix that. And you say that, instead of saying that, why don't you say this? And let's make that happen first. And let's gradually, a script, through rehearsal, a script, if you want to call it that, comes into existence, and it's very precise. So, to answer part of your question, no, I don't have a script that I show to an inner circle of critic or any of that. That just doesn't happen at all. We simply create the scenes, which includes the dialogue and everything that happens in the location, and then we shoot it.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have a question from Adam Buffery, who I'm just going to have join us now. Oops. So I think, Adam, have you got your video on? Are you able to?
Hello.
There we go.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Absolute honor. The first time I interacted with your art was actually Ecstasy, the play in London, before I saw in your movies. I'm just wondering, who are some of your biggest inspirations in terms of writers, in terms of novels, short stories, playwrights? Because I would love to know.
Well, it's a big question. And it's like all of people that get asked those sort of questions, it's the kind of question I hate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I mean, at the beginning, two very, very major influences on me as by way of playwrights were Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter.
Okay.
And the first thing I ever directed professionally was The Caretaker of Harold Pinter.
Wow.
Beckett, his plays and his novels. To some degree, somebody says, Samuel Beckett woo. Somebody's just, well, there you go. I take it you don't mean Samuel Beckett who. There have been a whole lot of different kinds of, in some ways, yeah, I've been inspired by Chekhov. I spent time in the 60s, when I was 24, I spent a year and a half as the assistant director at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre at Stratford-on-Avon, working on the big Shakespearean productions. Now, you know, if you're into writing at any level, dramatic writing, I mean, Shakespeare is it was really great to work on those productions, because you really thought about language and the drama and so on. And that was incredibly important. That's a tiny slither of an answer to your question. And there are so many writers and things. And you are asking about writers and not filmmakers and things. That really is. That's a short answer to your That's a short answer to your question. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
So we have the next question is from Kushalan, and I'll just have him join us now to ask his question. So Kushalan, you're muted at the moment, so you just need to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Amazing. So it's a tremendous honor to be speaking with you, Mike. I'm a massive fan of your movies, and I love everything about them. Let me just get my question. I had it written down.
Can't see him. Can only hear him.
It's fine. I don't have my webcam on.
Okay, right.
So in a lot of your films, from like Johnny Fletcher and Naked to Scott and Happy Go Lucky, you have a lot of these absurd, larger-than-life conspirator characters, you know, very akin to like David Icke sort of beliefs. And as someone with people like that in my family, I find it very like representative of like my life. So I deeply appreciate that. Why do you include these characters, and where do you or your actors find inspiration for them?
Well, it's a really a question with no answer, because, you know, they are a certain kind of character. I mean, in a way, even you're relating Johnny in Naked to Scott in Happy Go Lucky is a bit of a stretch. They don't come from the same kind of place at all. I mean, Scott is a not very intelligent, paranoid, insecure bloke, whereas Johnny is a very intelligent bloke, and he doesn't suffer from the paranoia of conspiracy theories. He's just got all kinds of ideas on the go. But the real answer to your question is that there isn't a sort of these characters don't represent, you know, there are all kinds of characters of all shapes and sizes in that world, which is in my films. And these are particular guys with particular characteristics, but there isn't a kind of imprimatur, there isn't a kind of a stylistic, consistent existence of those characters or decision to have them in my films. And so in a way, there isn't an answer to your question, to be honest.
They're just part of the living, breathing Mike Leigh universe.
Well, they are, but so are a whole bunch of other different sorts of characters. Frankly, I mean, honestly, that's the honest answer to your question.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Like, your character is very fluid and very unique, so that they have no defined sticking point, I can respect that.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Lovely speaking to you.
Okay, so we have Mason has a question. Let me just allow to talk. You're muted at the moment, but if you can turn your sound on, Mason.
Great. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. There we go. Thank you so much for making time to chat with us, Mike. It's an absolute honor. I've kind of always been interested in character-driven stories over plot-driven narratives, and often when I write a screenplay, and I share the story with others to receive feedback, one of the things that I keep hearing is that the stories tend to be meandering because they don't have the engine, if you will, of a plot-driven story, the drive, if you will. and I often struggle with finding a way to ground the narrative when I'm working with something that primarily is started with, you know, an interest in a character as opposed to, you know, a plot, if you will. I was wondering if you have any advice as to how to, you know, transcend that or overcome a problem like that.
Well, I don't see it. The problem is that I don't really see it as a problem as such. I mean, look, some films have got causal narratives, and some films are causal in their storytelling, and some films are cumulative. Causal films, A happens, therefore B happens, therefore C happens. I mean, you know, two of my films are very much plot driven, which isn't to say that they're not character driven, but Secrets and Lies and Vera Drake, you do actually sit there thinking, oh, this has happened, what's going to happen next? Are they going to find out? You know, when's she going to tell her and all that stuff? Oh, there you are, you're on the picture now. Whereas a lot of my films are cumulative narratives. In other words, something happens and something else happens, and by accumulating different experiences, that amounts to story. So I think it's not a question of there being you having a kind of disease that has to be cured. It's a question of what kind of story you're telling and what you think is interesting. You know, there are films which, you know, things happen and there's no way of really saying this happened and therefore that happened. It's just lots of things happen. And there are films that are by their nature plots, but that doesn't mean that they're not character driven. So the things are not mutually exclusive. And frankly, it's simply purely a question of what is interesting and what it's about and what happens to them. And that's all I can say, frankly.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to Matthew Gill for a question. And, you know, feel free to keep submitting your questions, or you can raise your hand. Just let me know that you'd like to ask something, and we'll go to you next. So, Matthew. You got your microphone on, Matthew?
He's keeping a low profile. Maybe you should go to somebody else.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, there we go.
It took a minute to rejoin there.
Hi.
Hi. I appreciate so much all three of you doing this.
Not at all.
What did you say?
I said, not at all. What's your question?
Yeah, you waited long enough. So I was wondering if you could help demystify a little bit your like delicate process of withholding certain greater story information or world information from actors, because that sounds like, especially when you were starting out, it would be an extremely precarious process, but it yields great results. So I'm wondering if, no?
Well, it's very basic, you know, if we're honest.
I like basic.
You know, the primary thing about it is that it means that you can explore situations in a completely real way. I mean, you've probably experienced improvisations working with actors. And, you know, if you say, okay, you're the husband and you're the wife and you're having an affair, you don't know that, and she's having an affair and you don't know that, now improvise. I mean, it's bullshit. In fact, you've got these things going on and they actually really, really don't know. I mean, this is a very crude illustration, obviously. Then, you know, immediately there's a tension, a reality on the go. Now you take that principle and apply it right across the board of the whole world that we're creating. And you get things like, are you familiar with Vera Drake?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen Vera Drake.
Yes.
Now, there's a scene in Vera Drake, a crucial scene, where the police arrive in the middle of the family party and arrest Vera Drake for being an abortionist. You remember that scene?
Yeah. Oh,
Now,
yeah.
2.5 months before we shot that scene on location, in the rehearsal, we rehearsed in a big empty hospital that was disused. We had an 11-hour improvisation. This is after 3 months of rehearsal. All the actors in it were absolutely in character, the costume and everything, for real, in real time, for 11 hours. The party, at one end of the hospital, there was a little, there were flats that the doctors and nurses had used to stay in when they were on night shifts. That had become, for months, the family flat. They were having the party, they were celebrating the fact the daughter got engaged to the guy next door, the brother-in-law, the brother and the sister-in-law had arrived to say that they were going to have a baby. What they didn't know on this day was at the other end of the hospital, there were actors playing police and we'd created a whole police station. The family didn't know that Imelda Staunton's character, Vera Drake, was an abortionist because she didn't tell them. She didn't know that what the last work she'd done with the last actress who had the abortion, that had gone wrong. They didn't know that there were actors playing doctors and nurses. Nobody knew anything that they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And when the police showed up, it was like dynamite. It was dynamite. 11, and so it gave us the raw material. When we went back to the location, went on the location, went back to the material 2.5 months later during the shoot, we were able to tap into all that. And so you get that complete three-dimensional reality. And that is the short answer to your question.
Yeah.
Wow.
Simple as that. It's not an art, it's not a sort of box of tricks. It's not a kind of actor studio kind of bullshit tricks. It's a discipline of, there's another aspect of it. When an actor, because in a way you said something interesting, you said it must have been very difficult when I first started. It wasn't, because that was the deal. That's what we're doing and that's what you did. And the interesting thing is, actors are curiously liberated by not having this overview of the whole thing. They're liberated by a sense of possession. I possess my character. And, so that's basically the answer to your question. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. It's a good question.
Thank you.
So Helen submitted a question beforehand. I'm going to see if she can maybe ask you directly. Helen, are you able to turn your mic on and ask?
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
How do I put my camera on?
Yeah. If you go scroll at the bottom of your screen, there's a little image of a camera and you click start video.
Hang on. It's not coming up. So I've got everything apart from a camera.
Well, never mind. Ask me the question without your face.
Sorry, Mike. I'm trying to remember what my question was now.
Okay, so you haven't.
No, I have got a question. I'm just trying to remember. I sent it in yesterday, I think. I've got one other thing that's occurred to me since, though, because you've been talking. It's such an immersive experience, your Q&A. But I wondered if you ever see your influence when you're watching other people who've come in your wake, if you like, because the person that's reminded me quite a bit is there's a Japanese filmmaker who just made a film called Shoplifters. And it just reminded me so much of your kind of work throughout, and it's quite a nice sort of contrived but loose at the same time ensemble piece. And they're all quirky characters. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have seen it. Of course I've seen it. And it's a great film. It never occurred to me when watching it that it was particularly related to my films or influenced. I mean, it might have been for all I know, but it relates to a whole lot of traditions of Japanese cinema as well, actually. So, I mean, I'm occasionally aware there are people who have been drawn some useful thoughts and ideas from what I do, but it's not something that I can really report on very much. And certainly it never occurred to me in watching that very excellent film, Shoplifters.
It's also the class system in there as well, which, you know, I know you've talked about. I read the book about, particularly with something like Peterloo, where you're comparing that, and it comes up again in the Korean film Parasite, where you've got the very small.
That's right. Yes, that's true, but that's because they are about society, and a society in which class issues are important, and those are certainly relevant that's very much a factor in a lot of my films. I think that's as much, Helen, that's as much as we can say about this.
Good. All right, fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anyone else wants to ask a question, if you just raise your hand or just say, yes, me, please, then I will have you join. Oh, okay, we have someone. Here we go. Soldad, I will have you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for doing this. We love your films. I particularly loved Happy Go Lucky, and I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the process of writing that film was for you. Did it start with the character itself? Was it about the story? How did it come about? And how much prepping did you do for that film?
Have you been listening to the conversation from the beginning?
I missed the first part, so apologies if I missed the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, most of what you're asking me, I've already talked about at great length.
Okay.
In relation to Happy Go Lucky, in fact, I mean, as with all these films, we developed it for quite a stretch of time. I did report that one of the starting points of the film was to work with Sally Hawkins, who I've worked with before, and to put her at the center of the film and tap into her own energy. Although, as I said earlier, the character is not the actress. They're two quite different. Yeah. But it developed in the way that all these films are developed, by extended improvisations and research and exploration of character, and then working with them, building the scenes on location. I'm sorry, but you're asking me to repeat a lot of what I've already said. So
no problem, no problem. Thank you for your answer.
If there's anyone else who's got a question, please just raise your hand or shoot me a hello and I'll unmute you. Oh, there we go, Zach Mason. Oh. Zach, have we got you?
Hey. Am I on?
Yep. There we go, now we can see you.
Hey, thank you so much. I hope you're not tired of answering questions about process. I was really curious to dig into a specific example, if we could, from the birthday party scene in Secrets and Lies. When you were going in to shoot that, what would the actors have prepared at that point? Would it be down to specific phrasing and specific blocking, or are you doing that on the day of the shoot? Are you sort of putting the final touches on that?
Well, that whole sequence, which is a long sequence, if you remember.
Sure.
We had shot 3/4 or 4/5 of the whole movie, and then the question was, how is it going to result? How will it end? How will the film end? When will the truth come out? We had not yet got to that point. We stood down the crew for 10 days. We then set up the kind of improvisation that I talked about a few minutes ago in relation to Vera Drake,
yes,
where they were completely in character in the house without any crew there, only this very small support production team and me. They were all in costume. They had all the necessary props, including food and everything. The characters who arrived by taxi came in a real taxi, etc., etc. Everybody arrived. So it was a massive improvisation that went on for 10 hours, which explored the whole situation, including the barbecue and everything else. That was a massive improvisation. We then spent well over a week taking it to pieces, putting it back together again, rehearsing it, structuring it, fixing it, deciding what happened where, who said what, including when the truth first comes out at the table, and suddenly it's been blurted out that Hortense is Cynthia's daughter, which you remember. In the improvisation, the actress playing the white daughter, Roxanne, left. She completely left. She said to the boyfriend, I'm out, I'm going, I'm out of this. I don't want to know. And she left. And they actually left and went off somewhere. And when I finally stopped the improvisation, it was quite a long time to find them because they disappeared, right? She came back and I knew that there had to be a further development of the story because the final truth had to come out. And this would not be helped by her not being there. She had to be there. So I had to, goes back to a question I was asked earlier about an actor doing something that I didn't want to happen. So I negotiated with the actress and I said, how was she going to leave? She said, well, she got the bus. There was actually, for real, a bus stop right across the road from the house, from the end of the street. So we explored through a series of smaller improvisations, her being at the bus stop with the boyfriend, Morris, Timothy Spall's character, coming across and saying, look, it'd be good if you came back. No, I'm not coming back. Please come back. No, I'm not coming back. And finally, we hit on the thing that if the boyfriend, who up to that time has been really had nothing to say, if he said, you know what, I think, with respect, I think you should go back, she'd say, okay, we'll give it, I will. So that's what happened. Then we brought her back in and explored the rest. And finally, we got to the actual truths that needed to come out. So all that was done by that form of rehearsing, arriving finally at a sequence of absolute precision, which then, when the crew came back, we were able to break down and shoot for another 10 days or whatever long it was. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's amazing.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Harvey.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Harvey.
Hi. Thank you so much for doing this. And my question was, are there some newer filmmakers or, upcoming or maybe even some more established filmmakers currently making things that you find to be exciting or interesting or important?
There are, but I said earlier, these are the kind of questions that they induce instant amnesia, these kind of questions. There's so much going on that I think is incredibly rich. I'm going to opt out of answering your question because I don't want to get into a whole lot of discussion about other filmmakers, but I do watch a lot of films. I am a film goer. I'm not one of the filmmakers that doesn't watch films, but I think it would be invidious to go into what you're asking me to, but I respect the question. You'll forgive me for not answering it.
No, that's completely fair, yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Baysam, and if anyone else has a second question, if you've already asked one, you're welcome to ask another one. So just let me know that you'd like to do so.
Yeah, I might pardon my greediness. It's just that we have you here, and I want to ask as many. So the other thing that occurred to me is this idea of endings in film. A lot of the films that I watch and I really like don't have a formal ending, and they don't really build towards a climax and have a conclusion in the end. And I had heard going through film school a lot of my professors saying that an ending in a narrative, in a movie rather, it's your grand comment on the state of the world, if you will. It's sort of like a punctuation, and I want to get your thoughts on the idea of false endings, or a narrative that doesn't necessarily build towards a conclusion. I don't know if I'm articulating it properly. I'm sorry.
No, you're articulating it perfectly well. It's again, it's a question of what the film is. I mean, there are films that benefit hugely from having an open end. There are films that benefit massively from having a cathartic, conclusive. And I've made probably both sorts of films. I mean, if you think about the end of Naked, are you familiar with Naked?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I mean, the end of Naked. I mean, okay, yeah, he finally takes the money and hobbles down the street, and hobbles a long way down the street with some difficulty, and then it freezes. When we showed the film at the New York Film Festival, the first question from a middle-aged guy who said, "Oh, Mr. Leigh," he said, "Do you think Johnny is dead within an hour of the end of the film?" I mean, I said, "It's up to you. That's for you to work." I mean, whereas we've been talking in the last few minutes about secrets and lies. Now, secrets and lies, in some, if you're familiar with the end of that, it comes to a very definite coming together and a thing. But there is a big unanswered question: who is Hortense's father? And she doesn't tell her. My hunch is she can't tell her yet, because the problem is she doesn't remember who he was. She obviously had a fuck at some point with a black guy, and she can't remember it because she was drunk, and and she didn't realize that was the baby. She had a white baby because thought it was a result of her getting together with somebody else, etc., etc. So those are two examples, but there are all kinds of films, and it's not a question of fetish or style or rules laid down by the professors on your film course who earn their bread and cheese by talking rubbish sometimes. The fact of the matter is, it depends on the film. It depends what story you want to tell. I mean, I make films where I do not tell you what to think. There are very good filmmakers who leave you in no doubt what the message is. I don't make films that do that. In the end, you reach the end, and I'm not talking about ends. I'm talking about the spirit of what's going on. I finally hand it to you and say, okay, now work with it, discuss it, ponder it, think how it might have been, what you would like it to be, and this happens on all sorts of different levels. And sometimes it is conclusive, but there's still stuff to think about, and sometimes it isn't. It depends what you're saying. It depends on the story. There are no rules. There are no rules. And I don't think you think there are any rules either. Judging from the posters on the wall behind you, I doubt that you think there are.
No, and I keep running into issues with my writing, because when you're trying to, as get your career somewhere and you're presenting your screenplays to people, oftentimes I hear that the story becomes kind of languorous. It's meandering. There isn't a real what happened.
You're now talking about a different problem.
Yeah,
you're talking about the stupidity of the people who judge your scripts. That's the problem. What I've managed to get around is not having to submit what happens to people because of the way we work. Because I think probably if any of my films had existed in script form, the producers would have, or the backers, whoever, would have not let us make the film in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So yeah, again, just feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. So you had one that was submitted that said, you'd mentioned work at the RC and on the Caretaker, and given that your process now involves improvisation, like how did directing those plays with like an existing text differ from what you're doing now? Or did it in fact follow some of that similar?
I directed, the first thing I directed was The Caretaker, which was in 1962. which is right at the beginning of my career. So I was learning my craft, and I was at drama school, I was at RADA, and I put into practice what I'd been learning, which is how you do plays conventionally. So the question of using improvisation never came into it. When I was at the RSC, I was the assistant director. I didn't direct the plays, I assisted. I directed the understudies and worked on I got cups of coffee for the directors and stuff, because I was 24 at the time, and now I'm 77. So again, although I had done some improvised plays, so misnamed at that time, and I did do one with the actors at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre when there was a play when the whole lot of them weren't in one play and had nothing to do for a stretch of time. So I was exploring that stuff, but I was learning about formal things and learning about Shakespeare, because the improvisation is part of what it's all about, but also the writing itself is part of what it's all about. That's the answer to that.
So we had someone else submit a question saying, apologizing that he can't go on camera because his wife is conducting a session next to him. So, but says that it would seem like during this pandemic would be a great time for you to be in lockdown with some actors exploring characters in quarantine for your next movie for months and months. Is that a temptation? If not, what is up next for you?
It's not a scheme at all. It wouldn't work, because we don't just sit in a room in isolation. We get out into the world and explore. I was about to start on a film when lockdown happened. That's been put into cold storage. Goodness knows when or how we'll be able to get back to doing it again. And that's a great difficulty. I'm afraid that what's being proposed by the questioner is not practical or desirable. I don't want to work in that kind of high, artificial and insular situation, apart from the fact that we're all in the middle of nowhere else where you can't just do it. So no, it's not a very useful proposition. Sorry.
Are there any other questions? Just raise your hand if you have a question. Oh, hold on. Somebody else asks, what then have you been able to work on in the current situation? Other medium, perhaps?
No, I'm doing a bit of writing. I'm thinking about things. I'm doing a lot of reading. I've been watching films, but I can't really proceed with what I was doing by the very nature of what I do. So no. It's a disappointing answer, I know, but that's the truth.
Any other questions? If you want to raise your hand or submit something, so you know you want to ask. There we go. Go ahead, Adam.
Is that on? Okay. Well, so you said that Naked started as kind of a story about one man, a solo journey. So can you explain a little bit how the other characters came into play, especially Greg Cutwell, actor?
What I actually said was that when the whole thing was on the go, I explained to the cinematographer that the focal point of it was that solo journey, but we'd already got a whole network of characters on the go. Okay. And that really, you know, if I understand what you're asking me, the answer is as obvious as you would imagine. Johnny, Louise, because they knew each other in Manchester, so we explored that relationship. Louise comes to London, we explore the relationship between her and the girls in London. Johnny comes to London and we explore their relationship. Johnny leaves, he goes and he meets the kids in the street. We explore those relationships. He's wandering around, he sees the guy, he meets the night security, Brian, we explore that relationship. We set up an improvisation where they could look through the window and they saw this woman, which I set up. We explore. That's how it evolves. I mean, that film is exceptional for my films because most of them have domestic relationships, families, and so on and so forth. In which case, it starts with the earliest possible character backgrounds, and it grows from there. You know, it's purely about following the logic of the journey of the characters. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it just felt differently in terms of the rest of the movies, I guess, how it's focusing on one guy a little bit more. But
yeah, but that's in the end.
It's still part of the fabric.
Dynamic of the film. I mean, because he is on that journey and he meets them, and you know that there's some backstory, but then a lot of it's. This is a film unusual in my films, actually, where the character meets people. You see them meet. You see the central character meeting people for the first time.
Right.
That's all it is. I mean, that's the explanation.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have a submitted question, which is, how do you manage actors who operate with different methods of working? You mentioned a distaste for the method, but surely there are varied approaches under a given film's umbrella. Do you find that there are different approaches? Oops, sorry.
Sorry, carry on.
Stanislavski or M. Chekhov, etc., can coexist within your improvisational development techniques?
First of all, just to correct what I said, I didn't make that negative comment about me. I said actor studio with a small a, and that's not the actor studio. I meant people that play tricks in actors' workshops and things. In passing, however, I would say that one of the things that is different about what I do from the actual actor studio, one of the principles of what they are very much into, Lee Strasberg's actor studio, is that I'm very disciplined about actors being in character and coming out of character, not staying in character for 24/7. You know, very much being very completely in character when you're in character, but absolutely coming out of character so that you can then be objective about the what happened in the improvisation and so forth, so that you can then work with the material. To answer the question, the primary question, which is how about actors who have other ways of working, not a problem. So long as they work with me the way I get them to work, there isn't a problem. I've never experienced an actor saying, oh, I don't work like this because I'm believing Michael Chekhov or whatever it is. That never happens. People have had those experiences. They come to this with an open mind and they embrace this the way I work for what it is. I mean, because there's a job of work to be done. So with respect to the question, it's not really an issue at all. It doesn't arise. I mean, I've already, let me just, in addition to that, I have already said at the beginning of when I was talking to Orla about the auditions. I mean, obviously, one of my job in an audition, just like any director, is to sort out the sheep from the goats, you know. You know, that's why I generally don't wind up with actors who are not going to, you know, do what we're doing, and or actors who are too unintelligent to understand that what we are doing and so on. I mean, you know, it's getting the right people on the job.
We have a submitted question that asks, you've done films on your favorite painter Turner and your favorite composers Gilbert and Sullivan. Do you have other favorites you'd like to potentially look at in future?
I don't think my favorite composer is necessarily Gilbert and Sullivan. And nor, you know, I mean, I like them and I like Turner's paintings very much, but you know, I think that's making an assumption. Yeah, I mean, there are things I might think about making films about, but I don't like talking about things until they happen, really. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question. Sorry to be boring.
Are there any other questions? Even if you've asked a question already, you're welcome to ask another. Just raise. Okay, here we go. Go ahead, Soledad.
Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
You're here in the flesh this time.
Yes. My question is mostly about today's industry. I've been trying to produce films that have, not necessarily found their audience because they haven't gone through the traditional film circuit. I guess they're they don't follow the necessary 3-act structure, and they, I was wondering if you have any advice when it comes to finding that audience, because there is a sense of acceptance that we all need as filmmakers and trying to get your film watched. And sometimes, the gatekeepers of the industry today have certain standards of how, the films that should be accepted into these festivals. And so wondering what your thoughts are on that today, and how to find that audience.
Do you mean festivals or distributors, or both?
Both, I guess. Because when
you're
you
talking
talk
about
to distributors, they're like, well, let it run through the film circuit first, right? And so they see you a lot more positively if you have something under your belt. And so when that doesn't happen, then it's even harder to go to the distributors.
What you're talking about is very, very difficult. It's a problem that exists. I mean, you talk about the gatekeepers. I already said this a few minutes ago to somebody else. I mean, the gatekeepers are not always as sharp as they should be, really. Sometimes they've got criteria which get in the way, and I think it's getting more difficult in some sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent much longer after the last film, which we made 3 years ago, trying to find money to make a film than I have for ages, because, people are, the gatekeepers are not being adventurous. So I'm afraid what you're talking about is a problem we've all got at one level or another. I mean, obviously, if you can get a distributor, that's good news. If you can get a distributor to put money into film, that's good news. On the whole, there are so many festivals. There are festivals that take all kinds of different sorts of films, but you just got to keep battling away. There isn't advice I can give you or a short answer. We are up against it, and to some degree we're up against it because although there are many great gatekeepers, as you call them, who are absolutely on the side of filmmakers and audiences and understand, there are many who are Philistines. Mm-hmm. And there isn't, I'm afraid to say, there's no easy or short answer to the very important and difficult question that you are posing. And I'm sorry, I don't know any magic. I don't know what magic wands one can wave. I'm sorry.
That's fair. That's
good
fair.
luck.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If you want to raise your hand. Okay, here we go. Your films are deeply involved with home, portraying people in an unromantic light that better reflects the English working class's reality. Part of my appreciation of your work is that it's composed of my home, my friends, and my family. Do you love London or Salford? Are you proud to be English?
Yeah, I love London. I'm very fond of where I came from. Am I proud to be English? Well, that's a complicated question. I'm very much part of my world, and there are many great things about that. I'm ashamed of my country in many respects. I'm ashamed of Brexit. I'm ashamed of the shambles that's going on at the moment in the way that the pandemic is being dealt with. But there are great things to celebrate. So it's a complicated question. And it's a question, I think, with respect to the questioner, it's a kind of narrow question, really. And I can't make a very useful answer to it, really.
Anyone else?
Are we scraping out the bottom of the barrel?
I think we might. I think it seems like mostly people have asked their questions, and we've asked everything that's been submitted.
Good. Well, that sounds like that's got the end of the session written all over it, Alex.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. We really, really appreciate it. This has been really wonderful and illuminating. For those of you tuning in today, we'll be back again next week at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll be talking to Toronto-based filmmakers Kadzik Radwanski and Sophia Bodanowicz. You can find out more about that session at lockdownfilmschool.com. And if you want to read more about Mike's work and how Peterloo was made, especially, you can check out our book, Peterloo in Process, at mikeleebook.com.
Thank you, Orla, and thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for your time.